Alrighty, well, it is 10:45, so let's get cracking. We can say anything about me as a speaker is that I love the sound of my own voice. So I will talk for hours and hours and hours just about anything. So I want to give us plenty of time for questions or whatever anybody might have. Today's talk that I want to give is on Sculpin, which is a static site generator. Dave said he kind of looked at it a little bit. How familiar are folks in the room with static site generators just in general? Just kind of iffy, a little bit. Perfect. Okay, so this is, we're going to have, let me back up a little bit here, a little bit about myself. My name is Carl Kudrowski. I work at VML, which is a digital marketing agency in Kansas City, Missouri. We're also a gold sponsor, Drupal Corn Camp, yay us. So if you're ever in the Kansas City area, I also help co-organize the local Drupal meetup with Scott Wilkinson, who's also here with us today. So if you're ever in Kansas City, give us a holler, and we can hang out and talk Drupal stuff. So goals. So I always like to have goals for talks, goals that I want folks to get out of what I'm going to talk about. And for this one, it's pretty simple. So I really want folks to understand how Sculpin works. Instead of going over like the features for Sculpin and going through all the really cool things you can do, really what I want folks to get is a good understanding of how it works and how you can use it. Right? So you can find good use cases in your own projects. Some tips and tricks or best practices for Drupal developers. So there's a few different things, different ways you can kind of organize Sculpin or use it, and there's a few things that I think that make sense for Drupal developers, and certain ways that you can organize your projects. So we'll just touch on those as we go through some of the examples. And then at the end, this is where we'll kind of wander off in the weeds a little bit. We'll talk about how Sculpin can be extended or even integrated with Drupal. So one of my motivations for static site generators is things like documentation, gathering up just information about stuff that's scattered all over the place and consolidating it into an easy to find, easy to deploy, easy to read format. And static HTML is a good medium for that. And I think that static site generators can help make that a little bit easier, and being able to integrate it with external systems or other data and things like that can make it a bit more seamless. So how are we going to do that? So we're going to look at why Sculpin for Drupalistas. I've looked at, over the last year, I've had this weird kind of infatuation with static site generators, which is kind of weird. For some reason, they just kind of have fascinated me over just the way that they work and the simplicity that you can get from just a static site. And there's a kind of a gap between a purely static website and like a full CMS. And the static site generator kind of fits in the middle of that. And I see that a lot in my work and just like for documentation and things like that. I see a lot of use cases where something that sits in the middle of a manually maintained pile of HTML and a full CMS really makes a lot of sense. So I've been looking at a lot of different static site generators, and we use quite a few different ones that work. And I think that for me, as a Drupal developer, that Sculpin really makes a lot of sense. So that we'll go through the setup and installation real quick. There's not a whole lot to it. And then we'll go through a bunch of demos to see how Sculpin works. I think you can see from all of the creative effort that I put into my slides already. I'm not a funny picture guy. I'm not a movie guy. I hate when people give presentations and they read the bullet points on their slides. So I overcome that with lots of demos. So we're going to go through a ton of demos and see exactly how it works. We're going to take the simplest Sculpin site you could possibly imagine, and then we'll build up to one that is integrated with a Drupal site. Sort of. We get too carried away with that. And that's what we'll do at the very end, is look at how we can integrate it with Drupal. So some basic stuff if you're not really familiar with static site generators. What are they, and why would you want to use one? So they're much simpler than a content management system. So when you have to deploy a CMS, you need at least a database or some kind of data store, then you need PHP and all this other kind of jazz. And everybody knows deploying static HTML is just drop dead simple. You just grab all of the files and you chuck it off somewhere on a web server that happens to be a Docker, and you call it a day. You can host it for free, just about on all kinds of different places on the internet. It's just dead simple from a deployment standpoint. It's easier and cheaper to deploy. Like I said, you can find free places to host it on the public internet. If you have a sysadmin team, it's super easy to get them to deploy static sites than it is to set up like a Drupal site or any other kind of dynamic content. It's more secure, so you don't have anything running on your server except your website, so it's really hard for somebody to submit a form that you don't have, to do any kind of SQL injections or anything like that. And it's faster and easier to scale, so there isn't anything on the internet faster than a static website. And there isn't anything easier to scale than a static website. You just pile on more web servers. And the static site, the generator part of it, allows you to take that, take all of those bullet points we just talked about and blow it out to a larger project. So if you have just a static HTML project, it can be cumbersome to go in and maintain all of those files. If you have thousands of pages on a static site, it can get pretty cumbersome if you want to go in and change the look and feel of it, you want to go change the content, things like that. A static site generator places a lot of the structure around that a CMS does to a static site that allows you to scale out a static site a lot bigger than you would if you just had a whole bunch of custom HTML. So, last one. This is one that I see quite a bit in a lot of folks, especially if they're like a WordPress developer or a Drupal developer, is that every site that they build is a Drupal site. And I see that in my own work as well, is because it's fast and easy for me to stand up a Drupal site. But the more tools I have in my toolbox, the better I am at picking the right solution for the problem. So why Sculpin? So out of the 398 static site generators, why would you pick Sculpin? And there literally are 398 static site generators at least. There's probably more. A lot of them are defunct and not maintained or anything like that. They're written in all kinds of different languages on all kinds of different technology stacks. But why would you pick Sculpin as a Drupal developer? Well, firstly, it's well supported and maintained, so it's not a dead project. You'll find a lot of people have written their own static site generators. It seems to be, 5 years ago, every PHP developer on the planet wrote their own framework, and then after that, they wrote their own CMS, and now everybody that's a developer is writing their own static site generator, except me. It's general purpose, so I don't want just a blog. If you look at Sculpin, the only what they call a skeleton that comes with it is a blog, but it doesn't have to be. So it's very much a general purpose static site generator. If you look at some of them that are more like Jekyll or some of the other bigger names, they're very much focused, at least appear to be, on the task of blogging. Because I think that's the itch that everybody was trying to scratch. It's like, I want a blog and I just want a static website because I don't want comments, I want to use discuss, whatever. I don't want to have to go maintain a PHP app just for my blog. I just want static HTML. So that's you'll see a lot of those out there. Sculpin is also extendable, so it's made to be extended. It's a little fiddly to figure out how to do that right now, but when you figure it out, it's not that hard. So from a technological standpoint, for a Drupal developer, Sculpin's written in PHP. It uses modern PHP tooling, primarily Composer, and I think as Drupal developers, we're going to be getting a lot more familiar with tools like that. Leverages Symfony components, like Drupal 8, I think. Haven't looked at Drupal 8 in a while, so I think they still use Symfony. Uses Twig for the template system, also a good thing because we're using that in Drupal 8, and he uses YAML for all his config files. Drupal 8 still uses YAML, right? Okay, good. That one wasn't sure about. Okay, so almost done with slides, almost getting ready to demo, so let's see how to install it. Now, I'm not going to do an install because you never want to use the internet in a demo or a presentation. So really all you have to do is you download the executable, which I'll show you the steps for that in just a second. You create a very, very simple directory structure, and we'll look at that too, and then you put a file in the right directory, and then you run this thing called Sculpin generate, and it makes an HTML site for you. Dead simple. So in order to, and I've already done this, so we're not going to walk through it, you essentially download a FAR, which is a PHP archive file, make it executable, and then you can either run it from wherever you downloaded it or whatever, but I like to move it into an executable or a path, directory that's on my path, and just call it Sculpin. These instructions are also on the Sculpin website, so you can get those. Just download it, make it executable, move it somewhere where it's in your path. Easy peasy. And that's it. That's the only installation you have to do. There's no like composer install or anything like that. It's fully encapsulated in this one file. So it is literally dead simple. All right, the second simple thing you need to do is you need to create a directory structure. Now there's two ways of doing this. First, you can use a starter kit. And the starter kit that you'll see referenced on the Sculpin site is for a blog. And it's a really easy way if you just want to try out Sculpin, create some posts or whatever, and see how it can create a blog for you. It's a great way to go. To learn how Sculpin works, I'm going to use the second way, is just to create the file directory structure yourself. This will keep all of the other bits and bobs that are in the blog skeleton kind of out of our way, so we can see exactly how Sculpin works and get a good understanding of how the tool is used. Okay, so let's do a demo. This is very, yeah, woo! Okay, everybody excited? Demo. Okay, so I am in this, so I've created, the first thing I have to do is create a directory, and I've already pre-created the directory called DrupalCorn-Sculpin. And in here, there's nothing. The only thing you have to do, this is our simple directory structure, is create a directory named source. In that directory, remember the other thing we have to do is create a file. So we're going to create a simple file in Markdown. That bit's optional. And we'll put some content in there. Okay. Does everybody know what front matter means? Okay, so front matter is a term used for stuff in between the two lines that have the three dashes. You'll see that concept pretty often in static site generators, where you have some metadata that you want to associate with your posts, and you put it in what is called front matter, which is just any amount of lines in between lines that just have three dashes on it. So it's super simple. In Sculpin, the front matter is always in the format of YAML. So when you want to put metadata, and we'll see some of that here in just a minute, when you want to put metadata about a post, you just use the YAML format and you put it in between the lines with the dashes on it. And that will become important when we talk about how Sculpin treats files. All right, now I'm going to do Sculpin. Well, let's look at what we have now. So we first have just this one directory. It has one file in it, and now we're going to do a Sculpin generate. And now you can see, not only do we have the source directory over here, got that in here, we now have this fancy thing called output_dev, has a test directory with an index.html in it. And we can do another generate with an option for watch and server. We'll take a look at some of these options in just a second too. And this will run, and watch these error messages, that's an annoying bit, we'll talk about it in a second. That runs a server that we can, oops. Okay, how do we get my, darn it. Lost my tabs. Stand by. There we go. Corn. Where am I? And remember, it was in the test directory. It says yay Sculpin. Now, if you look at the source for this thing, it looks just like that. So all it did is it took the YAML and or the Markdown and converted it into an H1 tag. Very exciting. Yay! Okay, that was very fun. Okay, so let's all right, let's kill this sucker. And I'm going to remove that one source file because that will screw everything up in here in a minute. Okay, so Back to demo. All right. So that is all you need. So that is the simplest possible Sculpin site you can have. One file, do it generate, everybody's happy. Okay. So how the Sculpin works. So there are two configuration files, and both of them live under a special directory called app-config. Well, let me back up a second here. There we go. There's the kernel YML file, which is for, it really controls the settings for Sculpin itself. So when you want to tell Sculpin how to process your files, you configure that in the Sculpin kernel YML file. And then there's another YAML file called Sculpin site, and that has settings for your site itself. So you have like global, like the title for your site and the name of your site would go in the Sculpin site YAML file. And you can have both of these are optional, and the site files can have environment-specific site configurations. So you can have one for your dev site, your stage site, your prod site, however else you want to do it, and you can put different configurations in those. The example on the Sculpin site you'll see is that the prod site is the only one that has the Google Analytics key in it. So you can check to see if that key exists, and if it does, then you put your Google Analytics in there. Otherwise, you don't, so you can kind of keep it clean from your dev sites. Okay? So let's take a look at that. All right, more demo. So in here, see, I've pre-baked some files. So I'm going to copy those over, and then let's look at this again. So I've copied over and I'm going to remove the output file too, just to clean it up because I deleted the source file. So now I've got an empty source file, and then I have a config directory, an app config directory that has the two files in it, and they're very simple. Okay, so this one has this very important little bit. Remember all those error messages we saw scrolling by about that was complaining about a missing posts? Sculpin by default looks for a directory called _posts that has posts in it. I don't know why. It is kind of bugging me. I think I view it as a bug. But you can actually turn it off by saying enable it is false. And then on the sites, all I have in here, and this again is just a YAML file, and it has a title that has DrupalCorn 2015 Sculpin demo. And we'll see where that's used a little farther down the road. So that's all you have to do to set up those configuration files. And again, both of those are optional. If you're good with the defaults that come with Sculpin, you don't need those at all. Okay, getting a little farther along. So sources. So what does Sculpin use to actually generate the HTML file? It uses a concept of a source. And really by default, sources are files that are underneath the source directory. Now you can write extensions, and Sculpin has a few, like in the blog post, that you can create virtual sources. But the simplest way that you can define a source is to stick a file under the source directory. So then it will handle these files in a couple of different ways. So if it's a markdown file, like the test one we looked at, it converts that into HTML. Then it looks at the files to see if they have that front matter or not. Now if they don't, they just copy them as is. So if you have a readme.txt file, and you just want that copied over into your source directory, or you have some other kind of example file that you want to link to from your HTML pages, you just leave the front matter out, and it will just copy it over as is in the same directory structure that's under source. Just gets it copied over into the output file. Files with front matter are processed through the template system. So it will apply the templates that you've defined. We're going to look at those in a minute as well as apply like pretty URLs and all that kind of stuff that you've defined in the Sculpin kernel YAML file, or the Sculpin defaults. All right, so let's look at that. Okay, so I have copied a few more files, or another file. We've copied this. These are the new ones, the index markdown for the README text and a test HTML. And none of these have None of these have front matter, so they all just either have HTML or Markdown or whatever we have here, right? What is that, test HTML? All right, so none of these have front matter. So let's run a Sculpin generate. All right, so it's going to blew out all of those files over here, and you can see that. And we'll just look at the raw file. Like the index Markdown file, all it did was convert that into HTML. So it didn't really do it. All it does is just copy it over, right? So, and it did it in the same directory structure. So it just took these things and it didn't do anything with them. It just copied them. Let me check my notes to see if there's anything I want to look at. No, that's it. Okay, now let's go and add the front matter to those files. And we'll just add empty front matter. If I can get my cursor over here. And we're just going to go 3 dashes. That's it. README. And the HTML file. Okay, and then we'll rerun Sculpin generate. And now when we look at it, well, here, wait a minute. One thing to remember is Sculpin doesn't remove files out of the output directory. So if you're doing things like I'm doing where you expect files to be in different places, it's always a good idea just to remove them. Just remove the directory.
I have a pull request for that.
Do you? Thank you, David Reed.
Clean option for generate.
Yes, I looked for the command. Where's the clean command? There isn't one. Okay, so this time, so from our source directory, we have front matter in there. Now it created the pretty URLs. Right, so it's created a README and an index TXT file, a test and an index HTML file, and then an index HTML file at the very top. That one's, just because that one was named index, it's treated kind of special. And then you can see that we'll, like the README index file, it didn't take Yay Sculpin and translate it into HTML because it's not Markdown. Oops. But the index file, it was Markdown, so it did. So it's still the same thing. So it's going to always process the Markdown files if it can. And you can add different processors. So if you want to process different other file types, it doesn't have to be just Markdown. You can write a Symfony bundle and then tell Sculpin about it, and it'll do the transformation when you run the generate. Okay? Easy peasy. Now, let's get to templating. So we can translate things into HTML files and everything like that, but if it's just a hunk of H1 tags, nobody's really going to care. You need to be able to actually create HTML files that look like a website. So there's a couple of ways that you can do that. The basic way is to create a list of a set of directories underneath the source directory. So this mixes the templating directories in your source files, which, if you're doing something super simple, might be the way to go. But even for that, I can't see why I wouldn't create a theme directory, which a theme directory is a special subdirectory in our source named theme, oddly enough. And then that's where your special templating directories go. And this is the two different options. So you can have the one on the far left there, you have includes, layouts, partials, and views, all underneath source. And then if you're using a theme, then it's under themes, under source. And then you have this directory structure, which is the vendor and like project name namespace. So it's an actual, just like a normal PHP namespace, it's a vendor and a project name. And that's how it finds it when you give it the name. So and then it has the 4 different directories in there. And those directories are just the defaults that Sculpin uses to look for your template files. And there's nothing really special about them. Right? It's just however you want to organize your template files, however it makes sense to you, you can create these directories. And then you can put in your Sculpin kernel YAML file, you can tell it what directories to look at. By default, it's these four: includes, layout, partials, and views. So it's just convention. There's no magic that happens that I can tell when you put a template file in any of these directories. So the only one I'm using for this demo is layouts, because it's super simple stuff. All right, so let's do that one. All right. So again, I'm going to remove the output directory, and then we'll look at, it's too big, forgot. Let's go to source. And now I have the 3 files in another directory. Then I have under themes, I have my vendor, who's me, and then there's a DrupalCorn theme under here. And it has a bunch of stuff, right? So I've got the 4 different directories, and then I copied over a Zerb Foundation hunk of HTML that I was working on earlier just to make it look different, right? So you can kind of see that the things are different. So you can have whatever you want in here. Like you see, I've got a gulp file that generates from my SAS files and all that kind of junk. So you can pack in anything in here that you want, which is why I say that having a separate theme directory is probably a good idea, because you can segregate all this stuff off in its own little directory. You can share it among many different Sculpin projects and things of that nature. The important thing to remember, though, if you're going to do that, is that everything is under the source directory. So what's Sculpin going to do with all of your theme files? It's going to copy them all to your output file and put them onto the interwebs. So all of my SAS files and all that kind of junk would get copied out there. By default, Sculpin ignores everything that's underneath your template file directory. So those 4 layout, views, partials, those directories get ignored, but anything else under there does not. So what you do is you just update your Sculpin kernel file, and you tell it what files to ignore. So that top line up there, I've got to ignore all my gulp.js files, my node modules that I'm using for gulp and all that kind of jazz, and all my SAS files. So you can just put whatever in there you want, and then it will ignore them. And like I said, you don't have to ignore the template directories. Those are ignored by default. And then that last bit down here at the bottom, right down here, tells it what theme to use. So you just give it the namespace theme directory, and that's what it's going to use when it generates your theme. So let's generate one. And I'm going to go ahead and add watch and server. Watch tells Sculpin to regenerate the files if you change a file underneath the source directory, or add a file under it, and then server runs the server, and you can specify what port you want or all that kind of jazz. So now we can go over to our browser. I wish that box was bigger. Get rid of test so I can get to the index file. And there we go. That doesn't look right. Let's look at this, and this should have all of my templating and stuff, and all it has is this H1 tag again. All right. Luckily, I meant to do that. So how does it know what template file to use? So if you look under source, themes, layout, there is a default HTML.twig file. Oops. Sorry. And it looks like this. Okay. It has all this HTML and all that kind of stuff in it. So it's got the site title. This is out of our site YAML file. And then it's got all this other kind of jazz. It's got the content. It's got a content type that doesn't exist yet. And then it has this special block for content, which is where our converted markdown file will go. and then some other junk. So it didn't use it. What we have to do is tell, there has to be some way for Sculpin to know what template file to apply. It knows what theme to use, but it doesn't know what template file to use. So what we do is we tell it by putting some specific YAML at the top of the file. And we'll just do this one. Oops. And we'll do the test file too, just for grins. And now when we rerun generate, just reload the index page, and yay, it looks better. Now we got a bunch of junk. Woo! And now see here the title's been replaced. So what it does, everything you put in your site YAML file gets spit out as a variable that's prefixed with site dot and then whatever it was. So this would be site.title. And you can put as many things in there as you want. You can use whatever twig directives you want to test to see if it exists or whatever else you like. Easy peasy stuff. All right. Does that all make sense? Okay. Get back to here. Okay. So now content types. So we just have these basic things, but Sculpin allows you to organize your content into types. So it's based on one of two things. So you can either have it based on path, and that's where we're going to look at it, or you can use a key from the front matter. So you can say, if the front matter has this key, it'll have this value. I want you to use this template. So we can have, and what that can specify for you is the different default layouts. You can have a different URL structure, and you can have a couple of other different settings, but those are the two big ones that we're going to look at. So let's take a look at how that looks. All right. So I copied over a couple of different things. Let's look at first the config file. So I've added under content types. Remember, post was one that kind of comes default with Sculpin, and I've added one called Drupal sites. And in here, I've specified how I want the permalinks or the URLs to look. So I want it to fall under Drupal sites / the name of the file / index.html. So it's going to have a pretty URL. It's just going to take the file name. And then I want to use a special layout file called Drupal site. And that one is in here. So we have two layout files. Now we have the default, and then we have a Drupal site. And that one uses the twigs. It extends default. So all I'm doing is to say I'm going to use the exact same template as default, but instead of what it was using for the block of content type, I want to substitute this instead. So in the top of the default one, there's a block of content that says content type is just empty, but I'm going to fill it in with this bit. And then under source, now we have a new directory called _Drupal sites. And you can specify what you want, whatever you want this to look like in your kernel file, but the default is just _ and then content type name. So if I were creating posts, I would have a directory under called _posts. I think you can see why I like to keep my theme files outside of the source directory itself, because then you really get a lot of cluttered up stuff. If you have 6 or 7 different content types in here, and then you've got 6 or 7 different template directories, then they all start looking very much the same. So keeping a themes directory under source helps you to segregate those things so you can easily figure out what you're looking at. And then underneath that Drupal sites directory, I have Let's just look at, there's just one file. So it has a heading, has just some text, and there's an empty hunk of front matter. Now, the front matter is empty because I don't need to specify what template I'm using, because I specified the template in the Sculpin kernel file. All right, so let's take a look at that. Let's run this. And then look at, see what the result was for that Drupal site. And Drupal site test site 1. Dang, that was not right. How do you make that bigger? Drupal corn 8000. Yes. Hey! All right, so now we have the title here, and you can. I'll show you this in just a second. In the default template, I have a thing in here called or a variable in there for the content type, and then this is just the content from the Drupal site. So if you look at the default template again. Layout default. You can see up here we've got site, and then down here block content type, and then it gets stuffed into there by the Drupal site template. Pretty sure. All right, so this one says content type Drupal site. Easy. So you can override what gets stuffed into those in your overridden template. So it kind of nests downward. Let's see. I think that. Oops. All right. So now we've got themes. All right, now let's look at, I guess we have plenty of time, how to integrate it with Drupal. And this will kind of, this is going to wander off in the weeds a bit, so we'll spend a little bit of time looking at this. But what I want to do, so the weird use case that I kind of contrived, admittedly, is I want to gather up a bunch of information about a whole lot of Drupal sites I have scattered around all over the place. And I want to consolidate that into some documentation so I know what modules they have, maybe what updates they're running, maybe just a list of all the Drupal sites that I manage. It's something that we've kind of struggled with before at VML, is trying to figure out what sites we manage, where they're deployed, who's responsible for them, all that kind of jazz, which ones need to be updated, which ones are really Drupal. So in the past we built like big websites together with stuff in the databases and things like that. But I kind of, when I was thinking about static site generators at the same time I was thinking about this problem, I was like, well, I wonder if we could just kind of wad up all of that information and then use a static site generator just to barf out all that documentation, and then you can just check it into Git, or you can deploy it out of a server, or whatever you might want to do. So as I started working through how that might work with Sculpin, I came to a couple of kind of realizations. One is use pages, because that's what Sculpin uses. So it uses these pages underneath that source directory. If you can solve the problem using those types of problems, then you don't have to write special extensions to make these virtual sources, right? So what I did is I'm going to create, as we saw, we have a Drupal site's content type, and for every Drupal site that I have, I'm going to create a markdown file that kind of describes it, and then I'm going to give it some metadata in the front matter so it can go out and gather up the dynamic information that I want to publish along with the static information. The static information might include who's responsible for it, when was the last technical architect or whatever that was in charge of the project, all that kind of information, and then I'll generate the information about the running Drupal site dynamically. So that was the idea. You could potentially just have a list of these things somewhere, write a Symfony bundle to do all of that automatically. I think that'd be bending the tool a little bit more than I would like. And it can be good things for, like I say, consolidating information from multiple sites or whatever you want to do. Okay, so the options you have are create a custom Symfony bundle. And if you look at how to extend Sculpin, it will give you a link to the Symfony documentation and say, go write one of these and then put this special config in your kernel YAML file. That's about all you get. Or you can create a Twig extension. My first thought was to create a Symfony bundle because creating a Twig extension kind of sounded like sticking my business logic in my view layer. And it is, but I did it anyway. And it actually didn't turn out to be as awful as I thought it might. I also kind of had the motivation of wanting to try to write a Twig extension because I can take that, you can take that, that knowledge and apply it directly into Drupal 8. It just uses Twig if you want to create some fancy kind of fields and processing in your template layer. You just create a Twig extension. And it turned out it was really, really easy. The hard part was figuring out what in the world you had to do. So let's look at this. Now again, we're going to, like I said, we're going to wander off in the weeds, so if your eyes glaze over, don't feel too bad. Mine will. Okay, let's quit that. Copy over a bunch of files again. Okay. Now, let's see where we want to start here. Let's start with the new Drupal site file. So, like I said, we put some of the information in the text of the file, and then we have some of it in here. And what I'm going to use in order to do my integration is drush. So I'm just going to pass in the drush alias for this file. So there is a Drupal site running on this VM that we're running all of this stuff off of, and its name is the testsite1.local in my drush RC files, right? Then it just has all the other stuff with it. So now, let's see. The other thing you need to do all of these are the same, so all those are, there isn't anything different there. The other big things you have to do is write your Twig extension. So here are the files that you have for your Twig extension. The Twig extension is kept, in my case, in drupalinfo.php. And I'm just underneath the app directory. We'll get to where you specify that in just a second, but that it doesn't have to be here, just keep that in mind. So this is a super simple PHP class that extends a base class of Twig_extension. And then what you do, and I wanted to create a new function that I could use in my Twig template. So I wanted to be able, and we'll look at the new Drupal site template or layout file in just a second, but I wanted to do is to just use a function inside that template and pass in the site or the drush alias from the front matter into that function and have it go out and get all of my information. All right, so I created two functions, one called Drupal info and one called Drupal modules, and they specify the over here on in the function the name of the function, which is right down here. So that's it. So all you have to do when you get this function, so I'm going to take in one parameter, it's the drush alias, and then I'm going to do something with it, which in this case is just exec drush, the alias, and then all the options I want to pass into the drush command. So it's one of the simplest thing you can do. And then that defines a Twig extension. So now I have a new function I can use in my Twig file to display that information. And the way you hook that up is the part that is, it looks convoluted because this is the simplest case. But it's just a normal way that Symfony works. And I am no Symfony expert, so I could be talking out of my hiney completely right now. But I don't think so. Dave can correct me if I'm wrong. So what you do is you create a Drupal bundle, right? You don't know? This is where one of those things is. I told Dave earlier that the best way to find out how to do something is to postulate online and tell everybody exactly how it's done, and it'll tell you how wrong you are. Okay, so in order to get this twig extension to get loaded, along with for Symfony to load that twig extension so your twig templates can use it, you create a bundle, right? And it's empty. So this is just a Symfony bundle that doesn't have anything in it. It just extends the class bundle. By naming convention, it will look in dependency injection and Drupal and the name of the bundle with bundle substituted with extension. And I'm specifying that it wants to load a special services.yaml file. And that is a special YAML file that I put, where did I put it? In the config directory. I'll put all this online so you can look at it too. And that is a special configuration file that when Symfony loads it, it knows that I'm doing a twig extension. It looks to see what class to load, which is the Drupal info. It's not public. And then there's a special little label you put in there that it's a twig extension. So now by putting that tag on there, it says, oh, this thing's a twig extension. So it loads that class and then exposes the functions that I've defined in that Drupal info file. That's all the Symfony magic. I haven't done Symfony in forever, but that's why I say I could be a little goofy about how I'm explaining that. But essentially, the bundle loads. It looks by naming convention in the dependency injection to find all of its configuration bits, loads in that file, which tells it to load in the YAML file, which tells it where to find the twig extension. We'll go through that one more time in a minute, but that's how it all works. Now you have to tell Sculpin how to get to it, and you do that by creating this special Sculpin kernel PHP file. And all you do is tell it what bundle it is. So it's right there. That's just in the document. That's in the Sculpin documentation. If you write more bundles, you just list them in it's just an array. You just list them all right here as strings. And it will go out and load the classes that you specify right here. The last thing you have to do is there's this new Sculpin JSON file that is a composer file, a composer.json file. Sculpin embeds composer. So if you're using Sculpin to run all this stuff, you just create sculpin.json, and then you do Sculpin install, just like you would do composer install, and it will download all your dependencies and set up your auto loading. So all we're doing here is we're telling it the namespace capital A app is found in the app directory. That's what I say, where I stuffed all of my files in the app directory, but you don't have to. You can segregate things off however you like. I did it in app just because it was convenient. I'm not going to run this because it uses the internet. Really, all it does is it will download any dependencies and things you specify in here, and then there's this hidden directory called .sculpin that has the autoloader and all the composer information, all that kind of jazz. So that's how it knows how to autoload all the classes you specify for the twig extension. Yeah, I know it's like running around the barn like 5 times to get everything done. Okay, then the last thing is now I have a new twig extension I can use in my templates. So if I go in here and I look in my themes, layout, file, I have my Drupal site, twig file that now has, remember we defined 2 functions. One was info, and the other one was modules. So I've got 2 different functions that I can call right now. I went too far. Right up here at the very top. So I set info, I set a variable, a twig variable equal to Drupal info, which is the function I define. And then I define page, which that's the context you want to use, and you're defining variables in your page YML file, dot drush equals. So it is just going to call that function, which is going to call a drush command, and it will return the results as a JSON string in an array. And then I can just loop through it just like I would any other PHP array that was passed into a Twig template. So let's go take a look at it. And get all the way back up here to the top. Darn it, too far. All right, it's taking longer. Looks like it worked. Let's hope. Now we just reload our sites file, and we have all this stuff here, and now we have all this Drupal info. So this is a result of drush status, and I just got the URI, and then I did a module listing that returns the name of the module, the version, all that kind of jazz. And I get all of that nice information. Pretty cool. You know, will you do that with Sculpin or not? I don't know, but you can. It's kind of fun. So let's see. Okay. So just to kind of go over that one more time. Sculpin kernel loads in a Drupal bundle that you've defined. Drupal bundle loads the dependency injection Drupal extension. The Drupal extension loads the services YAML file, and the YAML file defines a new Twig function, and you're good. Yay! Okay, so hopefully now that folks understand a little bit about how Sculpin works, how you might want to use it, and how you might try to figure out how to extend it. Good resources. There is the Sculpin website. The documentation is short. You can just read it all in like one go. Absolutely do that, because there's all kinds of neat little nuggets in there. It's super simple to just to read through it in one sitting. I've got links in here to how to create a Sculpin Twig macros. There was forgetting the guy's name. A couple guys helped me out in IRC for Sculpin. They're very helpful. So I've got the Sculpin channel here on Freenode. There's a couple of links in here that help me figure out how to get a Twig extension loaded into Sculpin. And then that's it. If I have any questions, we have 7 minutes. Nothing? Anything? All right. Well, thank you all for coming. If you have any questions, let me know. I'll be around here all day today and half day tomorrow. Thanks.
One of the links in the presentation to your example Twig extension.
Yes. The documentation to plug that back in. The back up one here. There's not that one. Well, kinda, yeah. What the heck did it do that for? Hang on. Where am I? So this one, this is the one that was most helpful. So this is, what's this guy? Kevin Boyd. So this one has a link into the Twig templating engine docs. So you just do, it's in cinciolabs.org. But this was the article I read about how to get a Twig extension into Sculpin. Is that what you were asking?
I was mostly curious about your specific Drupal Twig.
Oh.
One that you had written.
What was? Oops. Would you want to look at the actual?
I just want to know if it was posted somewhere.
Oh, sorry, it will be.
Okay.
Yeah, I was updating it this morning, so I haven't posted it yet. But I will stick it up there, and I will put a link to the presentation and the code of the finished product on the session page on Drupal Core site. Anything else? All right. Thanks. Again. Woo.